Julianne joined us 5 days ago. One more member of a global population that now totals 5.5 billion. By the time she's 21, she could be one of 8 billion people. And if you believe the most pessimistic predictions, children like her will be condemned to a life of impoverishment, scrabbling for what's left of the world's diminishing resources. Here in the Philippines, it's not hard to see why there's a sense of panic. 65 million people. By 2020, the figure could double. The government says that's a catastrophe. The country's on a downhill run to disaster. And in its efforts to get the birth rate down, it brushes aside religious and secular opposition.
In 25 years, we'll double. That's horrendous. That's what? From 65 million, you get what? 130 million. Again, I might be wrong. Maybe somewhere along the line, there'll be some discovery that will make that livable. Fine. If that happens, it's all right.
But on
suppose it doesn't happen.
On the present-day scenario, you'd end up facing, what, calamity, or is that too simplistic?
Sure. You know, food, maybe starvation, I don't know. We're short of water now. No? And because of the shortage in investments in health, I have a problem of cholera in the country. I'm not talking future, now. You know.
Yet opponents of population control argue it's not a problem of numbers. It's a problem of equity.
Above all, what they call overpopulation. It's not really overpopulation. It's the maldistribution of the wealth of the world. And of course, justice is a moral problem. And therefore, the problem is also moral and religious. And that's why we are in here, because of that.
The body of Christ. The body of Christ.
The average Filipino is 19 years old. These girls are soon to start bearing the next generation. They are the main target both of the church and of the government.
The body of Christ.
But in a country which is 85% Catholic, it's turned into a bitter battle for the hearts, minds, and wombs of the nation. But younger girls are increasingly questioning the moral authority of the church. These two sisters are going home to another night of rural poverty with their 6 other brothers and sisters.
Nahihirapan po ako sa pamilya namin. Gawa po ng, minsan po nawawalan po kami, kinakapos po sa mga...
For them, the church's stand against contraception is out of touch and out of date.
Hindi ko po yun susundin ko, hindi ko naman po kayang dalhin ang responsibilidad ng isang magulang.
Increasingly, this generation of young women has new aspirations beyond the traditional role of child bearer.
Kapag ka po yung malaki ang pamilya nyo, syempre po nakikita ko po sa pamilya namin na naghihirap po ang mga magulang ko. Kaya po pagka po akong nagkaanak po ng marami, para po hindi ko po makakaya ang pagdadala ng responsibilidad sa kanila.
As the only literate member of her family, Rebecca's education has given her options in life that her mother could never have dreamt of. For Flora Lisa, there was never any choice. She was trapped by her cultural attitudes and by her fear of contraception.
Pero hindi ako takot dyan. Ay ako nun sana'y numpa. Na ako sadyang magpapamilipano. Kaso ako minervyos, kaya hindi na rin ako sumali. Tsaka tulad ngayon, may edad na rin naman ako, hindi na ako sumali. Kumi na lang ang nag-aano mag-asawa na hindi na ako mag-anak.
Why is it that Filipinos have traditionally had such big families?
Well, the reason for that maybe dates from way back, since time immemorial. It's because Filipinos have this notion that if you have large family, if you have so many kids, really somebody will take care of you when you get old.
Ari ng lalaki na, at saka ito yun, daanan. Ang ari ng lalaki.
As one of 7,000 health workers in the government's birth control campaign, Dr. Daisan Alagon wants to convince women like Floraliza that they're misguided and to encourage the Rebeccas to hold fast to the new faith. She tells the women of Tanza village that they don't have to go on having babies.
Lambot ay hindi papasok ang kondom. Kaya kayo ay parehong maglalagay. Ayan, ganyan ha. Oh.
There's little emphasis on asking Tanza's menfolk to bear a burden of responsibility for family planning. For now, at least, Dr. Alagon sees them as a lost cause.
Because mostly Filipino men think that if they go to the clinic for information for family planning, it decreases their macho image. They become less man.
Madami akong napapagalitan.
In the drive to get birth rates down, it's always women who are targeted. And that's where the Catholic Church finds itself with an unexpected ally. Nelia Sancho, an influential feminist who argues women in developing nations have always been slaves to their sexual role. Population control, they say, is not only coercive, but bound to fail because it doesn't address the underlying problems. And Nelia turns to the so-called North, the developed nations, to make her point.
We know for a fact that in the North they have zero population growth because their living standards have been raised, women have been educated, and women know when to choose and are given more options in terms of education and health and other services. And I think if we do the same of improving the status of women economically, politically, socially in our own countries here in the South, that women will just decide to have less children.
That's a view increasingly taken up by a broad range of critics who say population control policies since the 1950s have never helped reduce a nation's poverty. What they see instead is a cynical political campaign by the developed world to avoid being swamped, and that's the underlying purpose of the UN's efforts to promote birth control.
To have a population policy has often been required as a precondition to access to foreign aid.
And do you see it as something of a quick fix solution rather than dealing with the basic problems?
Indeed, it is a quick fix solution to the population problem. If half of the resources they commit to the distribution of contraceptive methods were committed to improving the status of women in the rural countryside, perhaps the results from such an effort would be more effective in lowering fertility.
There are people who honestly feel there's no problem when I say, bless your hearts, I am the Secretary of Health, I'm going to do what I see is part of my duty.
So you say, bless your hearts, but you're wrong.
Yes.
And you have no doubts about that?
I have no doubts. From the point of view of 31 years of working in rural areas of my country. They've said that to me 30 years ago. They said, don't worry. By developing the country, the whole thing will put in its place. 31 years later, we're still in trouble.
At the root of the poverty so many developing countries face does lie corruption, appalling inefficiency, squandered resources, and greedy elites that treat a nation's wealth as their own. And ironically, it may be that the answer to what we see as overpopulation lies not through reducing the number of people on the planet, but by increasing their well-being.